Hey, Bill Lavender, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for joining me on Walking Inside Poems.
My
Looking
pleasure.
forward to looking forward to talking about Ralph Adamo and his poem "Reading in Bed." But quite a few other things I want to talk about before we get to that poem. I want to hear a little bit about you. I know you're a pretty important figure in the New Orleans poetry scene, and I know you have the New Orleans Poetry Festival coming up. You got a lot going on. Maybe maybe just give our listeners a quick little bio of who you are, what you're doing, and where where you've been.
Wow. Um, well, I started out in Arkansas, which is where I met Ralph and some other people, Frank Stanford, etc., C.D. Wright, and people like that. This is while I was an undergrad at the University of Arkansas, and met a bunch of poets up there and kind of decided that was what I wanted to do, and so ended up coming here to New Orleans. And then, uh, 10 years ago, I was at a poetry reading hosted by my friend Megan Burns, and had noticed that the Philadelphia Poetry Festival was going on right then, and we just kind of said offhandedly, why don't we have a poetry festival? Why does Brooklyn has one, Philly has one.
Mhm.
Almost every place has one but New Orleans. And so we said, well, we'll just do it. And 11 years and a whole lot of work since. Now we're rolling pretty good. And we formed a nonprofit 501c3 uh 3 years ago, and we have a very active board now, and like to have, I don't know, 300 or 400 people here this year. And it's, by the way, I don't know when this is going to air, but it's next week, the weekend of April the 12th,
Yeah,
2025. Yeah.
yeah, I think it'll air the weekend after that. But
Well, it's okay.
I suspect
This,
anyone
this,
watching this probably, if they didn't have plans to be there, wouldn't be there anyway. But
right.
maybe we'll help promote it for next year. And
Yeah.
would this turn out to be one of those many things that you go into knowing it's going to be some bit of work, but once you get into it, you realize, oh shit, it's a lot more than I thought.
It's pretty phenomenal, but I've worked pretty hard the last few years to try and put together a team, take some of the work, um, you know, to take it over, to spread it around, and feel like we're getting there. We've got a bunch of great people. Sean Monroe is now the executive director, and I relinquished that title. I'm just the treasurer now. Actually, it's my official title. But we all pitch in and do everything as it approaches. This year we've got it's an extensive program. We've got a road show. We go on the road the week prior to the festival, going to Lafayette, going to Nichols State in Thibodeau. We're also doing a show in Angola Prison, the Louisiana State Prison. We partnered this year with Allison Pellegrin, who's the state laureate. She put together a program to do workshops and readings and things in prisons and community centers around the state during her tenure, and asked us to help her with the logistical side. And so we did that over the past year, and now she's, the program's kind of culminating, at least for the first year, at the festival this year. and we're doing a reading at Angola on Thursday.
Very
A
cool.
week, yeah, a week from today. I realize that means nothing, but
Yeah, by the time this airs, that's okay.
yeah.
And tell people about you publish as well. Lavender Ink, and you've got another press now, don't you?
Well,
Imprint.
it's another imprint.
Yeah.
Yeah, Diálogos is the second imprint. I started Lavender Ink in 1995, and originally it was just stapled chapbooks for my friends, essentially, and it, it gradually grew, and I started doing perfect bound books, and started meeting more people and getting more interesting submissions, and finally got into doing a lot of translations. Um, and so that was the birth of the Diálogos imprint. So now it's kind of referred to, most people refer to it as Lavender Ink Diálogos, with a slash between them.
How many books
And
do you typically put out a year?
I guess average 10 to 15. And I don't know, they kind of come in spurts. I don't know why that is, but like just launched a dozen since the first of the year. It's now April, beginning of April. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know that I'm going to do that many more the rest of the year. There may not be any more until 2026, but
Okay.
yeah, I've got about 220 books in print as of today. Yeah.
Nice, nice. And one of the books that you put out is Ralph's book, All Fall Down, which
Mm-hmm.
our poem that we're going to look at today comes from. This is Poems 2020 through 2024. Maybe let's I'll read the poem here in a second, reading in bed, but maybe let's say a little bit about Ralph first. I think did you say you go back to Fayetteville? You met Ralph up there?
Yeah, in let's see, this would have been 1971 or 72. So yeah, he and I go way back. And
We're getting old, Bill. We're getting old.
yeah,
71, 72. That's a long time ago, my
yeah, it
friend.
is, isn't it?
Yeah. What is the is there a Fayetteville New Orleans connection there, or is that just because of a couple of you guys?
Well, so what happened was at that time, University of Arkansas was just beginning to put together its MFA program. There weren't that many in existence around the country. There were, I don't know, maybe there were 10 at the most, and uh, they hired Miller Williams to come and run the program, basically. They had other writers there, but they hired Miller. Miller was teaching at Loyola at the time, and when he came up to start at Arkansas, he recruited some of his favorite undergrads and brought a bunch of them up there. And Ralph was one of those. Um, so that's how I met him, and that's how I kind of learned about New Orleans, was from him and John Bignay and John Brazier, and is there anybody else from New Orleans? I'm not sure,
Did
but
Stokesbury have any connection to New Orleans?
I don't think he did at that time. He later developed one and came down here a bit. Um, in the aftermath of that. But I moved down here, and with the intention of staying, 2 or 3 years, and I'm still here. Yeah.
Right on. And by the way, I want to plug some of your work too. You've got quite a few books out. This is your most recent book, is that right?
It's yeah.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
is.
yeah, my ID. And
Hmm.
I'll put links in the show notes to you so people can find you in the press and everything. Let's talk about Ralph a little bit. He is a professor at Xavier now, and I just found a great little quote I want to read that comes from uh, I guess it's his website. It's just a quote from Ralph. He says, "But the image, I am increasingly convinced, represents how poetry comes, is the same way earthquakes and ultimately mountains do. Urgent fire bursting into air with the resulting alterations in the landscape, our lives composed of something like tectonic plates and the poetry emerging from the roiling at the edges of the component parts of our lives. Something like that. The poetry coming from deep down in the disturbance, coming up out of necessity and in chaos. And of course, the poet, him or herself, waiting in the trembling, already shaped to give form to what will emerge from the darkness. Anyway,
Where's
that's my
where's
my
that from?
uh hang on, let me finish it. Anyway, that's my way of thinking about poetry for
Oh,
the
I'm
moment.
sorry.
I am struck too by the realization that the poetry usually comes ahead of full consciousness that great and rapid changes are taking place, or even that there is a disturbance. This comes from an NEA, I guess it's an NEA website. I guess he had a grant from the NEA.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I
Yeah,
remember it now. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
That was his statement on
yeah.
his NEA application. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that'd be a nice way to a way into Ralph, and I want to hear a little bit about Ralph from your perspective. But let's go ahead and read this poem and take a look at it. It's
Yeah.
called "Reading in Bed," and it does come from again from this book published by Lavender Ink called "All Fall Down." Reading in Bed. And by the way, do you mind reading the poem at the to take us out at the end? Do you have it handy that you could do that?
Yeah. Yeah, I
Okay,
sure do. I'm looking at it right now. Yeah.
right on. Okay, reading in bed. The happiest I've ever been is in bed reading. First on Daniil, first word I learned to spell, curled under my dad's old army blanket with a Donald Duck comic, new or not, and outside the window, rain, or not so long ago, say 12 years or 13, on Willow, our original house, in the room with several beds and a pile of books. The kids loved hearing us read until the better story of sleep arrived in. When Hurricane Laura brushed across southeast Louisiana, the people who died, two entire families, perished because the generators, purchased to return light to a house that had lost power, were too close, and as the families slept with the lights on, after reading bedtime stories or comic books, they gradually gave up the ghost. Now I must say that mostly when the sex was good, reading was off and off the table. Even once, months in, I'd failed to reach the halfway mark in the extremity of pleasure. Been around the same block about 100 times, walking my dog, that great funny beast, past the houses of people I think I'd like to know, one whose light is always on in an uncurtained window where she is never visible. Oh me, oh my, I lean to bag the shit and stand looking at it. We walk on, the dog and me, and all the many worlds my back carries. Listening to an old song, I wonder, who do I love? And more to the point, who has loved me? Was there ever shelter? I can't recall. Now uh, I'll show this a little bit because, reading poems sometimes is a little dicey because people can't see them. It's broken into sections with some asterisks in between. It's broken into one, two, three, four different sections with asterisks in between. Um, Interesting poem for sure. Uh, I have a few things to say about it. Any initial impressions you want to comment on?
Yeah, one of the more interesting things about this is something that you often find in Ralph's work, I think, and that is that it kind of moves, it sounds like it's moving in a logical sequence, but when you get to the end, you can't really figure out exactly how you got there, and so it jumps from reading in bed, and the childhood memory of reading in bed, and then to the Hurricane Laura stanza where conjectures that people were reading in bed with generators on, and that's how they died. And then to the stanza about sex, and sex as kind of um, a replacement for reading, or something that canceled the reading.
Yeah, I think for me that's the funniest stanza here. I mean, he
Yeah.
says he says when the sex was good, I didn't read so much. Normally I'd
Yeah,
read.
right. Yeah.
We're talking about reading in bed, and
Yeah.
the way I take this, and even once months in, I'd failed to reach the halfway mark. I'm assuming what he means is he had a book by his bedside, and even months later, he still hadn't reached halfway through that book because the sex
Yeah.
was good. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. But then that last stanza really it doesn't have as much, at least overtly, to do with reading in bed.
No, no, it doesn't seem to have a thing to do with reading in bed. Just walking the dog, you know.
Mm.
Um,
Unless the woman in the uncurtained window is perhaps reading. I don't know. That's no reason to assume that, but that's the only way I could get reading in bed into that last stanza.
well, the way I'm reading it is that reading is also an act of voyeurism, and that this is another kind of reading
Mm. Okay.
where one whose light is always on in an uncurtained window where she is never visible.
Hmm.
Very strange image there at
Yeah.
the open window that he always looks at, but she's never there. um
And then he's picking up his dog shit.
yeah.
Yeah. And then I want to definitely talk about the ending, but before we do, let's go back to see what we can say about these first couple of stanzas. This first one, uh, the happiest I've ever been. That's a really that really grabbed me right off the bat. You don't see a poem very often talking about the happiest I've ever been, and then of course by the end we really it's not so happy. But it's Daniil. I assume that's a street in New Orleans.
Yeah, Daniil is a
Yeah,
street uptown. Yeah.
as well as Willow, I assume.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And such a fascinating uh, way to end that stanza. It's almost like it doesn't complete the sentence. The kids
Yeah.
kids loved hearing us read until the better story of sleep arrived in.
Uh-huh.
In what?
Yeah, very strange. It was like it came in,
Yeah.
came in through the window.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm assuming the better story of sleep is dreams, perhaps.
I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, what? I have myself written poems in which I've ended a line like that and troubled over what the next line was going to be and decided to just leave it. I wonder if that's what he's doing there. He said sleep arrived in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just leave it like that.
Yeah.
It's intriguing. Yeah. And do you remember Hurricane Laura? I don't know when that was. I didn't look this up.
I actually don't remember that one, but I mean, basically there's about one every year,
Sure.
where a couple of people will die from generators.
What is that? Help me understand that. Why? How do the
Well,
generators
but what
build?
they do is they tend to like put them in their garage or something, and let the house fill up with carbon monoxide fumes.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Very
um,
sad.
very very common down here.
And then we talked about the sex stanza and the voyeurism dog stanza. Man, how about this ending? Listening to an old song, I wonder, who do I love? And of course, I'm thinking of that old song, Who Do You Love?
Right? Yeah, that's what I
Yeah,
thought of too. And I assume that's what he means. Yeah,
yeah. Listening to an old song, I wonder, who do I love? And more to the point, who has loved me? Was there ever shelter? I can't
yeah,
recall.
right. Yeah.
Wow.
So
Um,
I guess he's referring to "Gimme Shelter" there too. Um,
hmm,
you know, but you know, who knows? And I mean, maybe does the shelter go back to the hurricane
okay.
stanza? I don't know. Yeah.
Well, and then the shelter of him being a little boy learning to read, probably feeling safe. It's the happiest he's ever been.
Mm-hmm.
He was certainly sheltered there. Um, but I can't recall. That's a very troubling. We don't need to literally interpret this, but that's a pretty troubling ending. Um, and
Yeah.
ironic because the whole poem is recalling, and then at the end he says, "I can't recall." What do you make of
Yeah.
how does that um, work with you there? What do you think of when you read that?
Well, I find that almost always in Ralph's work, there is this lightness that I always like. He kind of skims across a linguistic surface, and he speaks in a very colloquial way. Um, it's informal and even imprecise, and I think he cultivates that imprecision. Um, and so you end up with this piece of language that doesn't resolve.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, and I think the I can't recall is just a way of saying, that the happiness that he starts with, you know, is that's an interesting way to think about it. You look back at the beginning, the happiest I've ever been, um, was first on Daniel, the first word he learned to spell. So he's
Mhm.
remembering back to very, very young, and then at the end he says, I can't recall.
Mhm.
Um, So it's like, to me, this poem is a kind of a parable of reading and um, remembering
But then
and
what? But then
dreaming and also writing. I think he never mentions writing, but that's there. That the first word,
you know that thing that Elizabeth Bishop used to do a lot, where she would make a point and then she'd question her own point. Uh,
right? Uh-huh.
it's almost like he's doing that because he's saying he starts off happiest I've ever been, and there's detail here. There's you're really he's really painting a picture, and then
Mm-hmm.
he's moving to the hurricane, and he's moving to the sex, and it's all pretty. Even though the language is a little slippery, it's pretty clear what's going on, and then all of a sudden, and then with the picking up the dog shit and the uncurtained window, and then all of a sudden, I can't recall. So it's almost like he's saying he's ending. I see it a little bit dark. I don't know if you see it that way, but it starts off very light and very happy, the happiest ever, and then it's kind of like, you know what? Maybe all this is, I don't know.
Yeah, I've been around the same block about 100 times.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, I think it's slightly dark.
I
Yeah,
mean, who has loved me? It's
yeah.
almost questioning, was there ever shelter? Was I ever safe? Did anyone ever love me? And who did I ever love anyone? And I can't recall. That's I want to ask Ralph.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I will. I'm hoping to have him on an upcoming
You
episode.
know, I'll bet if you ask him, you wouldn't be able to pin it down
Right,
any
right.
more
Yeah.
than it is right now.
And
Yeah.
and despite the fact that we know that we don't need to pin it down and that this is not an essay and that it doesn't need to make
Mhm.
logical sense, it's language, it's words, and we still kind of have that urge to say, I wonder what that. But I love that about poetry, and I love that about Ralph's poetry. It leaves us wondering for sure. And
Yeah,
so
Ralph is resolute about that. He will leave you wondering. He's not going to have some ending that's going to tie it all up for you, you know.
yeah, yeah. Well, you know Ralph. What else can you tell us about Ralph Adamo?
Um, well, when I was first preparing to move from Fayetteville to New Orleans, um, called him up and said that my then wife and I were coming down to apartment hunt, and he immediately said, "You can't stay here." And I said, "Oh, come on, man, just for a couple of days." He says, "No, no, there's too many people staying here already."
That's funny.
And so we just got in the car and went down there and stayed with him while we apartment shopped.
That's funny. Uh,
Yeah,
and he wasn't saying that the way he spoke to Everette Maddox in that poem, where he says, "You don't want to live here, man. You're not going to make it here." Uh,
yeah.
uh, Anyone who saw that episode, that was with James McWilliams. I'm trying to remember the name of that poem by Everett Maddox that was dedicated to Ralph,
Oh
uh,
yeah.
in which Everett recalls Ralph saying to him, "You're never. It's not going to work here, man. You're gonna end up a drunk under the bed," which basically he
Yeah.
did. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did
Mm.
you know Everett?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, a little off subject,
But
but tell me a little bit about Everett.
well, so I don't remember the year, but it was very early on after I moved here that one night Ralph called me up and said, "Hey, there's this poet named Everette Maddox. He just moved to town, and we're getting together at his house." And it was only a couple blocks from where I lived, so I went over there. So I met him the day that he moved into town, and he and his wife Celia and her daughter Stephanie, I believe it was, um, and fell in love with all three of them pretty much immediately, and we were pretty tight for a long time, actually. I we were very close while he was married to Celia, because Celia and my wife became friends, and we would do a lot of stuff together. We would go out drinking, stay all night in the quarter together, and four of us, and a lot of things like that. We'd
Did
go
you
over. play board games at each other's houses and things. Yeah, I knew him pretty well.
Did you see it coming? What what he intimated, that Ralph intimated to him in that poem, that he wasn't going to be long for this world if he's going to live in New Orleans.
Um, I didn't. At that point, I didn't anticipate his downturn. He was fairly competent when he first got to town. I mean, competent in a sort of concrete way, like he could go out and apply for jobs and get one. And he had a series of teaching jobs. But he just drank more and more, and I think drank his way out of them.
Yeah.
And you know, and then finally, Celia basically had to leave him. I mean, it broke my heart to see it happen, but on the other hand, I could understand because he would have dragged her down with him, and she just she couldn't do it,
But
And
and that has happened to a lot of people. It didn't happen to you or Ralph. You and Ralph are both survivors. What do you attribute that to? Because I mean, look, let's be honest. Being a poet in New Orleans, it's probably a recipe for a short life.
yeah, well, you know, I had a few friends like Everett who drank themselves to death or drugged themselves to death or died one way or another. And that was a bit of a wake-up call. But I think generally I don't know. I just never felt like letting myself go down that path.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I had, me and the ex had kids early on, and I became very, very centered on making sure they were supported and fed and gotten to school, etc. And that's a pretty sobering exercise, you
It is.
um, to keep them going from swaddling clothes through college. Yeah.
I absolutely do wonder sometimes, had I not had kids, what kind of bad roads I would have gone down. You're absolutely right. It's a
Uh-huh.
wake up call, and it's a responsibility that most of us anyway take pretty seriously. Well, hey, Bill, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. Would you do us a favor and read this poem reading in bed to take us out here?
Sure. Yeah, I was thinking about it while you were reading it, how I might read slightly differently.
Yeah,
Only
that's
slightly.
great.
Yeah.
That's great.
The happiest I've ever been is in bed reading. First on Daniil, first word I learned to spell. Curled under my dad's old army blanket with a Donald Duck comic, new or not, and outside the window, rain, or not so long ago, say 12 years or 13, on Willow, our original house, in the room with several beds and a pile of books, and the kids loved hearing us read until the better story of sleep arrived in. When Hurricane Laura brushed across southeast Louisiana, the people who died, two entire families, perished because the generators purchased to return light to a house that had lost power were too close, and as the families slept with the lights on, after reading bedtime stories or comic books, they gradually gave up the ghost. Now, I must say that mostly when the sex was good, reading was off and off the table. Even once, months in, I'd failed to reach the halfway mark in the extremity of pleasure. Been around the same block about 100 times, walking my dog, that great funny beast, past the houses of people I think I'd like to know. One whose light is always on in an uncurtained window where she is never visible. Oh me, oh my. Lean to bag the shit and stand looking at it. We walk on, dog and me, and all the many worlds my back carries. Listening to an old song, I wonder, who do I love? And more to the point, who has loved me? Was there ever shelter? I can't recall.
Ralph Adamo. Bill Lavender, thank you again so much. Enjoyed our chat. I wish you all the best. I know you're probably pretty absorbed in the festival that's coming up next week, so I wish you all the luck in that. I actually was going to try to get down, and I just can't make it, but maybe next year.
Yeah, every
All right.
April. All right.
Thanks again. Take care.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.